Hello, YouTube. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, the father of cosmonautics or aeronautics, as some call him, was at the origin of the theory of paleocontacts. More precisely, the idea of plurality of intelligent worlds in the universe. Astronautics or cosmonautics is the practice of traveling beyond Earth's atmosphere into outer space. Space flight is one of its main applications, and space science is its overarching field. Back at the beginning of the 20th century, the Russian teacher from Kaluga, it's a small town, talked about other planets and about possible inhabited worlds to which people would fly. In his work, The Will of the Univers, he wrote the following: previously, no one allowed the possibility of celestial contacts, especially traveling outside the Earth. Therefore, the opinion was established that they were impossible. And if so, then all the facts proving these relations, so to say, or contacts, if they were mercilessly denied by the people of science. Indeed, for many years, the possibility of visiting the Earth by representatives of any other civilizations did not occur to anyone at all, except for some notable exceptions I have mentioned in my videos, and some more I will mention later. Largely because people themselves were tied to the Earth and did not imagine that people could actually fly, and not in fairy tales. However, as time went on, mankind invented airplanes. Science fiction writers and individual scientists began to think about flights into deep space, and that's when people began to have thoughts about other inhabited worlds. Again, there were earlier exceptions. In 1930, an anonymous reader's letter appeared in the Soviet magazine Vestnik Znания, Bulletin of Knowledge. If there are undoubtedly more developed cultures in the universe than the Earth, then why haven't the inhabitants of other worlds visited the Earth yet? Professor Nikolai Rynin expressed himself quite definitely. The statement that the inhabitants of other worlds did not visit our planet is really confirmed by the official history of all countries. However, if we turn to the legends of the ancient times or antiquity, we will notice a strange coincidence in the legends of countries separated by oceans and deserts. This coincidence lies in the fact that in many legends it is said about the placement on the earth in immemorial times of inhabitants of other worlds. Why not assume that these legends are based on some grain of truth? Well, Professor Rynin knew that what he was talking about. For many years, he collected any mention of flights in the myths of all times and peoples, I guess as many as he could collect, and then published it in the multi-volume encyclopedia Interplanetary Travel. These myths say that even in ancient times, people flew amazing flying machines, which in many ways surpass the modern ones. But despite the fact that such authoritative scientists did not deny the possibility of visiting the Earth by aliens, paleocontacts, they were called Paleovisits in the Soviet Union, did not become the object of scientific study. In many ways, of course, this was hindered by the objective difficulties of the Soviet state. Science solved pressing problems, and few people were seriously interested in the question of aliens from the past. And then World War II began, after which for a long time everyone was not up to this problem or discussions about it. Among those who have studied the paleocontacts in the USSR were people of different ethnicities: Great Russians, Jews, Ukrainians. I do not want to call them all Russian, as this is incorrect, because they had different backgrounds. So I will refer to them as Soviet, denoting the place where they lived and worked most of their lives, but not their political sympathies, of course. Well, back in 1945, the famous science fiction writer Alexander Kazantsev put forward the assumption that the Tunguska meteorite or Tunguska event was in fact a guided spacecraft that exploded as a result of a nuclear explosion. Later, Kazantsev began to claim that mankind itself appeared as a result of visiting our planet by representatives of other civilizations. However, he stated this not in scientific articles, but in his works, science fiction works. But his ideas also resonated in the scientific world because Kazantsev told in his books about real scientific mysteries. For example, the demise of the planet Phaeton. Researchers have been struggling with its enigma for a long time. In 1974, Kazantsev wrote the novel Phaeacians. According to the science fiction writer, the mysterious planet perished due to a nuclear explosion that occurred during the war between its inhabitants, and several of its inhabitants ended up on our planet, on Earth, and became the progenitors of human beings. Interestingly, the Nobel laureate Niels Bohr, who came to Moscow in the early 1970s, blessed the Soviet writer for the creation of Phaeacians. Kazantsev, during the meeting of the great physicist with Moscow writers, asked him a question: could the explosion of a super powerful nuclear device cause an explosion of the entire planet? Niels Bohr replied, "I do not rule out the possibility of such an explosion, but even if this were not the case, nuclear weapons should still be banned." Kazantsev wrote this in his memoirs. Niels Bohr's answer turned out to be the impetus that prompted me to write the trilogy Phaeacians, where the hypothesis is expressed that mankind may originate from space migrants who, due to circumstances, did not return to their home planet. The writer in this novel voiced and interpreted other existing enigmas in his own way. The mention in ancient Indian epics from India of flying chariots and mysterious weapons, mysterious Japanese figurines resembling astronauts, mysterious Inca and Aztec gods, and so forth. One could consider all this fiction, but Kazantsev himself was convinced that extraterrestrial visitors had visited our planet in the past. In 1984, during an interview, he was asked if he believed that star aliens had been on our planet. The writer spoke unequivocally and definitely. "I do not understand such a statement of the question. To believe, not to believe, I just know they were. I know because I have decisive evidence. Now it is necessary for science not to dismiss the curiosities of nature and history, but to engage in a thorough development of not only the radio astronomy, but also the historical direction of the research." Alexander Kazantsev passed away in 2002. However, it was with the historical direction of the research that there were problems. For some reason, the theory of paleocontacts aroused keen interest among the representatives of the exact sciences and was completely ignored by humanitarians, historians, and philologists, although it is in various oral and written ancient sources that there are descriptions of visits to Earth by representatives of developed civilizations. As the famous Soviet philologist, researcher of the theory of paleontology, Yuri Morozov wrote once, "The reason was simple. Historical sciences have always dealt exclusively with terrestrial phenomena, and even the beginning of the space age did not shake the concentration of these sciences on purely domestic issues. Thus, the situation is paradoxical. The problem of paleovisit has been formulated. Its scientific relevance is quite obvious, and there seems to be no one to investigate the problem in concrete historical terms. But physicists were just trying to investigate the theory of paleocontacts. The doctor of physical and mathematical sciences, Matthias Agreste, was sure that the Earth was visited by aliens. Moreover, he proved this precisely with the help of exact sciences. He studied the structure of mysterious tektites, claiming that they were formed as a result of a nuclear explosion. Agreste also raised the question, why do ancient sources say so much about phenomena that were discovered recently? For example, in ancient legends, there's accurate information about the moons of Mars, discovered only in the 19th century. The physicist prepared an article in which he raised these issues for publication in the digest reports of the USSR Academy of Sciences. His scientific supervisor was Igor Kurchatov, a famous Soviet scientist, who recommended the work of Agreste to the Academy of Sciences. However, Kurchatov's sudden death prevented its publication. The scientific community considered this hypothesis too bold. Hardly anyone will even remember the names of the scientists who banned that publication. Today, who will remember their names, since they didn't become famous in anything special and did not discover anything. Then Agreste sent his work to the Soviet newspaper Literaturная Gazeta, and in 1960 his article entitled "Do Traces Lead to Space" was published there. Since after Kurchatov's death, Agreste was left without authoritative support, his publication was very coldly received in the scientific world. But the Western media immediately reprinted Agreste's work, after which the theory of paleocontacts became a favorite topic of Western researchers. The first among them was Erich von Däniken. However, in the USSR, because of the Iron Curtain, Däniken was little known, although later in the Soviet Union his film Chariots of the Gods was a great success. And therefore, for some time in the Soviet Union, they tried to study the theory of paleovisits from a scientific point of view. The work of Agreste was published in the digest On Land and Sea, and the editorial board noted that the hypothesis of Agreste, regardless of the attitude to it, is built on materialistic basis and deserves attention. Agreste was born in the Russian Empire, the present-day Republic of Belarus. In 1915, he graduated from the Leningrad State University, now St. Petersburg State University, in 1938, and received his PhD in science, physics, and mathematics in 1946. He became the chief of the university's laboratory in 1970. He retired in 1992 and immigrated with his wife Riva to Charleston, South Carolina, in the United States. Agreste passed away in 2005. Articles devoted to the theory of paleovisits began to appear in Soviet newspapers and magazines. The geologist Vladimir Avinsky engaged in this theory, and not by chance, because it is the geologists who have to face the mysteries of past times. For example, they find mysterious objects in coal that seem to be millions of years old. Avinsky passed away in 2017. In 1981, the publishing house Nauka, or Science, published a digest Search for Extraterrestrial Civilizations with an article by Orientalist Igor Lisevich, Ancient Myths Through the Eyes of a Man of Space Age. The researcher asked questions: why are the descriptions of creatures very similar to robots in ancient Chinese sources, as well as mysterious silver carts that can fly? Alexander Alfredovich Garbovsky is a Russian-Soviet novelist and historian, better known for works in other genres, for example, popular science and so forth. He was born in Kiev in 1930 and graduated from the Moscow Institute of Oriental Studies. He was a candidate of historical science. and he worked as a senior researcher of the USSR Academy of Sciences. He was an Orientalist and Indologist, and translated Tagore from Bengali. He studied the social consequences of the scientific revolution and the issues of intellectualization of society. Subsequently, Garbowski, who began his literary activity as a popularizer, so to say, of science, wrote Riddles of Ancient History in 1966. The first version of Garbowski's book, Riddles of Ancient History, was published in the collection World Adventures for the year 1963 under the title 14 Millennia Ago. At that time, it was like a bomb that exploded. And I read his works just as I did other writers I mentioned, but he was really very knowledgeable. He was living in the UK for the last 2 years and died in December 2003 in London. I corresponded with Garbowski probably a few years before his death, and people like him and Agrest, of course, very knowledgeable, and Lisovsky, who brought up this information about the Yellow Emperor in China, and I found more about it years after I wrote about it using some other sources. Incredible people, and I have to give it to them. But then there was a Ukrainian engineer from Kharkiv, Vladimir Rubtsov, who published in the magazine Technika Молодежи, and his articles were also devoted to the issues of mysterious flying chariots. For example, in his article Astrovidia, Myth or Reality, from the technical point of view, he considered flying chariots from ancient Indian epics and claimed that this was a description of mechanisms. I corresponded with Rubtsov through the years. His book on the Tunguska event is one of the best, in my opinion, out there. It's available in English too. And he sent me interesting information about the Yefremov expeditions in Mongolia, which I hope to use one day, probably in a book. He was well known, and Rubtsov collaborated with philologist Yuri Morozov, who also studied Paleovisits. By the way, Rubtsov passed away 10 years ago in 2013. In early 1991, Yuri Morozov's books, Traces of Ancient Cosmonauts, was published in the popular series Question Mark in the Soviet Union. In it, he talked about the history of the study of paleocontacts and about the problems the researchers face. The work ended on an optimistic note. The scientists claimed that an initiative group consisting of scientists from several countries had been created. The issue of the Journal of Paleovisitology was being prepared, and the study of paleovisits would be put on scientific rails, but soon after the USSR collapsed, the scientific community had been going through a lot of serious problems all these years, and for many years scientists have not been up to aliens, to study aliens from distant planets who once left footprints and traces on planet Earth. I wanted you to know about the people in the Soviet Union, and I'm sure there were others too, but especially the ones I named, who were the pioneers in this theory of ancient aliens and the need to study them. But the theory of that intelligent extraterrestrial beings, sometimes called ancient astronauts, visited Earth in the distant past, influencing human culture, technology, and religion. Paleocontacts, contacts with representatives of another intelligence or aliens in the prehistoric era when the Earth civilization was mainly at the primitive stage of social development. At that time, no one except the aliens themselves would have been able to clearly and document the facts of contacts between cultures that differed so much that the aborigines often did not even have the appropriate terminology to understand and describe the techniques, occupations, and features of alien life. However, the overwhelming impression that the aliens must have made could not but leave at least the slightest trace in the culture of at least some of the Earth peoples. If we turn to the tales and legends of ancient antiquity, we will notice strange coincidences in the legends of countries separated by oceans and deserts. This coincidence lies in the fact that many legends speak of visiting the Earth in immemorial times by inhabitants of other worlds, wrote Soviet professor Renin in 1930. On the one hand, in the legends of the African Dogon tribe, the plots are not exactly like that, but also contain some astronomical data which were unexpectedly confirmed by modern astronomers. It is clear from whose feed, so to say, such information has overcome the thickness of time. On the other hand, it is possible that the appearance of aliens in ancient times could be recorded under the names of deities, heroes, supernatural forces. This idea is suggested by some of the Sumerian myths and some picturesque fragments from the Mahabharata. In Cyrano de Bergerac's novel Another World, or The States and Empires of the Moon and the States and Empires of the Sun, a resident of the Sun declares to representatives of Earthlings, "You have undoubtedly heard of us, and after all, we were called oracles, nymphs, spirits, fairies, vampires, gnomes, naiads, incubi, ghosts, shadows. Despite the presence of the best terrestrial minds, mankind as a whole seemed ignorant to the newcomers from the sun, so to say, and they lost all interest in terrestrial civilization. They too, with the exception of a few experts, are not interested in the swarming of ants in the anthill and in its surroundings." That's how people who read Bergerac's work described it. And I just wanted to underscore that this idea of the multiplicity of the inhabited worlds out there was not, of course, limited to one continent, one country, one civilization. I just want to give you some more examples. For example, the torch of the discussion about the paleocontacts was picked up by one of the heroes of the novel of Jules Verne, Around the Moon, explaining the absence of direct and indirect traces of a visit to our planet. He considered that the space vehicle of the aliens could easily get lost in the ocean depths and in one of the deep mountain crevices. This approach assumes an accident after which the miraculously surviving aliens would not be able to take advantage of their technology. In the first place, the aliens would have the problem of their own survival. At best, they would engage in educational activities among the aborigines in exchange for recognition of their equality. Neither one nor the other worked out for the aliens in the story of J.H. Rosny, or Prehistoric Tribes in the end declared a merciless war on the aliens. Let me try to pronounce the name. It's French. Le Chipechus, published in 1888, is a novella that described the fight that threatens humanity in the beginning of its history against a new form of intelligent, non-organic life, the Chipechus, some sort of sentient crystals. The narrative consists of two parts. First, it is a descriptive third person. It's a description of encounters between the nomadic tribes and the Chipechus, resulting in many deaths from mysterious weapons and powers. This is followed by encounters of the clans and tribes, ritual sacrifices, and assembly of an army which is defeated by the Chipechus. The second part is the memoir of a wise war chief who observed the Chipechus from afar and then carefully approached them to find out their habits and vulnerabilities. Despite nearly being killed on several occasions, he discovers how individual Chipechus can be killed and how to overwhelm them. He then describes a war of attrition where many thousands of warriors encircle the Chipechus and reduce their numbers, which have grown into the thousands, sacrificing many men to kill a greater number of the Chipechus. Finally, the forest inhabited by the Chipechus is raised. And then there was Isaac Newton, who once wrote, the great physicist Isaac Newton, I should say, how everything around us is teeming with living beings, so the heavens above us can be filled with beings whose nature we do not understand. And just as the planets remain in their orbits, so any other bodies can exist at any distance from the Earth, and moreover, there may be beings who have the ability to move in any direction at will and stop in any area of the heavens to enjoy the company of their own kind, and through their messengers to control the Earth and communicate with the most remote corners. As can be seen from the logical constructions of the greatest minds of the past, the problem of paleovisit grew out of the conviction that the outer space was populated not only by living, but also by intelligent beings. This era of great geographical discoveries proved that the Earth is just a sphere, not the center of the universe, and showed mankind that the world around is infinite. When our planet ceased to be an endless world for mankind, standing on whales and turtles, and turned out to be a relatively small planet, like mushrooms after rain, fantastic stories and scientific treatises about flying to the moon and its exploration began to appear. The further course of thought boiled down to the question: if we Earthlings are going to visit the Selenites, people who lived on the moon, then why don't they visit us? This is how the French popularizer of science, Bernard Lebovie-Fontenelle, who lived in between 1657 and 1757, posed the question in Conversations about the Multiplicity of Worlds. Maybe aliens in general and Selenites in particular have already visited us once. It was the most influential work on the plurality of worlds in the period. He wrote, it was published in 1686. He wrote extensively on the nature of the universe. Behold, a universe so immense that I'm lost in it. I no longer know where I am. I'm just nothing at all. Our world is terrifying in its insignificance. Approximately in this form, in the middle of the 19th century, the idea of paleovisit was formed. It is necessary to pay attention to the term. It should be borne in mind that during their visit, the ancient astronauts were not at all obliged to come into contact with ancient mankind. If there was contact, then in this case, it is more correct to talk about the outgrowth of paleovisit into paleocontact, especially when there is an opportunity to prove by scientific methods the transfer of material or intellectual achievements of alien culture to the aborigines of our planet during this contact. Considering this possibility, the Soviet scientific encyclopedist Professor Renin in 1930 published a 6-volume encyclopedia Interplanetary Travel, the first 2 volumes of which are devoted to the analysis of the actual side of the paleocontact. So we come to full circle, and I hope to read one day excerpts from Renin's book and bring you more interesting information about the Soviet approach to paleocontact. And you can see my videos too about Ivan Yefremov and others in the Soviet Union who had connections to this. I think you will find it very interesting. And of course about the history of ancient Russia, UFOs and USOs in the lands surrounding Russia and China and Eurasia. Thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support my work through the links you will find in the description to this video, please do. Please tell others about my channel.